Welcome to Jeff and the Rabbi. Today, since we've started over in the Torah here, we're going to be talking about Abraham. I got to tell you, Abraham is one of my favorite guys. We were just talking about it. He's one of my favorite guys in the whole Torah here. Mm-hmm. And I have a side story that will lead me into why Abraham is one of my favorite guys. About 10 years ago or so, we decided, my wife and I, we wanted to get a home a beach home down in Florida. Thought it was a great idea. I pictured this. You get this great beach home. You go down there, relax, a deck overlooking the water, and you just stand there by yourself looking at the water. Maybe you read a book at night. You go down to the beach by yourself. You take a nap on the beach, relax. Everything's great and relaxing. Perfect setting. So we get a beach home. It didn't work out exactly like that. What I've learned the old adage where they say the only thing better than a beach home is a friend having a beach home. And I learned I had a lot of friends. A whole lot of friends. More friends than I ever knew I had. I had friends from college. I had friends from Atlanta.
By the way, is your home busy on the week of November?
I have to check the list. That's the thing, I have to check the list. I had cousins, relatives, sisters, brothers, cousins, husbands that all knew me and wanted to come down.
Best friend.
And the worst thing is we were, a little younger then, so our kids were young, and I really like my kids. They're great. My kids are great. But other people's kids, they always thought, well, I got to bring my kids, and they're crying and they're screaming, and that was just with my wife. It was just, it got to the point where it was not that great. And then I met you. We started studying Torah. Get right to Abraham. And, here you tell me the story of Abraham. Here's this guy. He comes out there. He circumcises himself. 3 days later, he sees three men coming up the path.
Circumcises himself when he is 86 years old.
Right, so his eyes weren't that good anyway in the name. Good point. And up come these guys, and he's running around. He's so excited. People are coming. He's yelling at the wife, go make a cheesecake, go round up the goats. Let's make a pie, whatever it is. And it all worked out pretty well for him. So I decided, that maybe I got to live my life a little differently.
Open the tent.
I opened up the tent, and it stayed open. It was a great thing. I'm not going to tell you there weren't any bumps on the road. It didn't work out perfectly. The first time I sent Carla, my wife Carla, first time I sent her down the elevator to go churn some butter and slaughter a goat, she wasn't as receptive as I thought she'd be, from a girl from Alabama. I was thinking, she's from Alabama. Who hasn't slaughtered a goat in Alabama?
Right.
Her response to me wasn't as nice as probably Sarah's was to Abraham at the time, but she's gotten way better at it.
Wait, did she come back with roadkill instead?
Well, yeah, it was pretty much. She went to Kroger for the slaughtered goat, and it wasn't as good. But, she's gotten a lot better at it. She really has, and now we're happy, and I've learned to live with the whole thing. So Abraham's my guy. I figure if I'm going to choose to emulate anybody, Abraham's the guy I want to emulate. Now, that being said, I like Abraham. Why did God choose Abraham? I mean, great guy. He, again, hospitable as can be. He comes from kind of a broken home there, a home of idol worshippers. Wasn't there anybody better suited or as suited?
A lot of people say, by the way, that Abraham discovered God. Like he was the first guy to find out about God, and he looked around, he saw the world, he said there must be a creator. This is too complex. There must have been a creator, and he discovered God. That's what a lot of people think. Now, it is true that Abraham did figure out that there must be a creator.
Right.
However, he wasn't the first person that figured that out, and he wasn't the only person in the world that figured that out. There were a lot of people around that knew about that.
Well, you weren't that far from the flood at this point, right? I mean, you got
there were Shem, right, who came off the ark himself. Shem was around, and he was not only around, he was like a priest, or he had a whole religion.
He would have been a good guy to start the whole thing.
So the reason that Abraham was chosen was not because he figured out about God.
Okay.
Although you give him credit because he came from a very idolatrous family, and he did figure out about God himself, not from his family, but he's not the first person in the world that did. There were plenty of people that knew about God and even worshipped God, because Shem, son of Noah, who came off the ark, had a temple, and he was a priest to God. I assume if there was a priest, there was a congregation. So, so there were people who were worshiping God. So
he was a great-great-grandfather of Abraham, or a couple more greats.
He was in Abraham's lineage descends from Shem. Now, I don't know exactly how many generations that were, but I believe it was 10 generations from Noah to Abraham. So, he was a great-great-grandson.
Right. Okay.
Right. That's true. But it wasn't, so it's not because that Abraham knew about God. But the Torah does tell us exactly why it is.
And why is that?
The Torah says, in a great story that's coming up about a week from now, we're going to read about it in the Torah portion as we read our weekly portions. The portion that's scheduled to come up is about the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God has decided that they are just so evil, they're going to be destroyed.
Right.
God says, before he destroys these cities, can I not tell Abraham what I plan to do? God says, I got to tell Abraham. Right? Which is pretty cool because God feels like so close to Abraham that like he can't do something without,
It's a big deal.
even telling him. Right. So God says, I got to tell Abraham. And he says, why? Because I know about Abraham. And this is where God says, what makes Abraham so special? Why does he have to tell Abraham as opposed to all the other guys on the block? Why does he specifically have to tell Abraham? And there are other even pious and God-worshiping people around. But he tells Abraham because Abraham does two things.
Okay.
Abraham does two things, and number one is that he, Vishamru es derech Hashem. It says he will guard the way of God. Abraham doesn't just try to do what God tells him. What he does is he tries to observe the way of God.
Oh, interesting.
Okay? Now, like for example, you may have seen this somewhere, like you have a student, or a understudy, a coach, and a team, and a player. Now, there's some players that follow all the instructions of the coach, and some students that do everything the teacher says.
Right.
And there's some children that listen to their parents. And then there's some children, students, players, that try to be the coach.
Try to emulate and be the coach.
I try to act like the coach, you know?
Okay.
Like you ever go into, used to be when you go like to a baseball game, like on a park, all the kids are playing, and the kid steps up to the bat and he goes, I'm Chipper Jones. And he's holding
or they go out and they always point, like the Babe Ruth.
Right. And they're trying to like act out in their mind, like they're like narrating the game. They're pretending that they're this player. So that's different than just following instructions.
Right.
That's a whole different level. You have some children that, they're observant, meaning you tell them what to do, and they don't break the rules too bad, and, they find out, like, where the parameters are, and they don't go outside the parameters. This is a good boy. Good boy, good girl, we in this house, we don't do this, and they observe that. Right? But there's others that try to figure out like who you are and what you are, and they try to be that.
Try to live their life that way.
Live their life.
And that's definitely a difference, yeah.
Right. And Abraham was the first one that came along and tried to do that.
Wow.
Abraham, everyone else, there were other people, they were observant. God said, don't do this. They didn't do that. God said, do this. They did that. God says, that's what I do. Abraham came along and he said, wow, God, I want to be like God. Now, he knew he wasn't going to be God. Right. But he looked around at the world and he said, where do I see? So I see God as kind. I see God as, he has this world that's all open. He's hosting people all day long. Well, I'm going to have my little world open and I'm going to host people all day long.
That's interesting.
Where did he get that from? It isn't because it said somewhere that he had some instruction, you're supposed to host people all day long. He said that's the way God does it. He says God provides for everyone what they particularly need in style. So, he gives the honeybee exactly what it needs, and he gives the ram exactly what it needs, and he gives them so he says, when my guests come into my house, I want to give them what they need. So, like for example, he would bring in a guest and he served them tongue, even though it means you have to slaughter a whole animal just to get a tongue, right? But he gave him tongue because tongue's a delicacy. You're a guest, you deserve a delicacy in my house, and so on and so forth. So the first thing God says about Abraham, he says, I know that Abraham guards or observes the way of God, which means he sits there and he thinks and he looks at him and he sees, I notice God does this. That means without God even having to say anything, he has observed the way of God and he's trying to integrate that into himself.
Wow.
That is what makes Abraham, and to tell you the truth, Jews, different. Because, God says, and this leads us to the next point, one other factor about Abraham makes him different. It says, Abraham is going to command his children after him. In order that, because Abraham will command his children after him to do justice and righteousness, and they will observe the way of God. So not only does Abraham do it, but Abraham seems to have figured out how it is to command, to get this communicated to his children, so his children will want to do the same thing. And that's big, because there were lots of other people that were doing things like that, like Shem.
Right.
We talked about him.
Right.
Ever hear whatever happened to his?
No. Well.
None. We don't know. I mean, I'm sure he was a nice guy and all that. Very
Right.
pious guy, and he was a priest to God, and I'm sure he was very good. But what happened to his kids?
Well, we see. Not much.
Nothing. I mean, we never heard of them,
generations.
so I guess nothing happened to him. And there were other pious people around in the world. Whatever happened to them? Nothing.
Right. So it is. That's like the whole mission of the Jews. I mean, that makes sense.
So this continuity thing, and it's not just continuity for continuity's sake. It's continuity, like, for example, you see like the really rich guy, and he's got kids, and he wants to pass along his estate to his kids.
Right.
And then half the time you see like, with kids like that,
Right.
he'd be rolling over in his grave, right? He wants to pass on the estate to his kids because he wants them to appreciate it the way he appreciated it and to act like him. And that's the whole thing that Abraham has. Abraham can communicate to his kids to be like him.
Interesting. Well, which just on the side, it does bring up a little bit of questions with Abraham's children, because if you look at it, Abraham pretty much is at least the father of three religions and maybe more.
Right.
We're not sure. He treats them a little bit differently. He treats his children a little bit differently.
That's right. And really, if you look at it, of the three religions, I would definitely say that two of them are very obedient.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And one of them is observant. In other
That's
words,
the way to look at it, yeah.
like especially let's take the Muslims for example, right? They got lots of rules and regulations, and they follow them. To whatever extent they work on it, they try to follow all the rules and do right, and they got a lot of it's pretty elaborate, with the Sharia law, and they try to observe all that, which is cool, right? But you don't hear too much about trying to be like God, trying to be like God. What's that? There's observing the rules, and if you observe the rules, then things will go good for you. You'll observe, you'll get rewarded, right? And Christianity is also very much like that. If you don't observe, you're gonna get eternal hell and damnation.
Right.
If you do observe, you're gonna go to heaven.
Right.
All that's really good. But for Abraham, he doesn't even care about heaven or hell. He just wants, because he loves God, he wants to be like God.
Wow. Right.
It's a whole different attitude.
No, definitely, without a doubt, and you do see that with Jews. I mean, if you're looking for the purpose of a Jew, that's the purpose of a Jew.
Right. Now, the really interesting thing is, there's been a big stir in the Jewish community as of late, because the Pew Research Institute just released their latest findings about Jews in America. Jews in America, big study, Jews in America. And everyone is, they can't talk enough about it. Now, to me, although the findings are startling, but they're not surprising, because they are only continuing trends that have just been gone on unabated for the past century.
Right.
But they found, for example, that I think the figure was, in 1970, less than 20% of Jews intermarried.
Okay.
Okay. They found that of Jews who married between the year 2005 and 2013, total Jews, 58% intermarried.
Wow.
And when you take the Orthodox, people who profess to be Orthodox, out of the mix, 71% intermarried.
Wow, that is actually startling. Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
No, to me, the only reason I wasn't startled, although 71% is a pretty big number because it's getting pretty close to 100%.
Yeah, it's getting there.
You know, but 71% didn't startle me because I remember 10, 15 years ago hearing figures that were already back in the 60s, and I remember seeing all those numbers. So the trends are just continuing. You'd have to say that Abraham's kids, Abraham's not doing it because his kids are not following the way of God.
Not a good chunk of them. No.
One third of Jews in America profess no religion. No religion.
That doesn't surprise me. No.
No religion. Okay. They ask them.
Obviously, that came from probably the last time they did the survey of intermarried Jews. I'm sure their parents. That's probably where they came from.
Yeah, right. That third is certainly contributing high to that 71%.
Right.
But 1/3 of Jews, if you just ask total, 1/3 of Jews, they don't believe, they profess no religion. Now, of the other 2/3, I would venture to say that a good chunk of them might profess a Jewish religion, but have very little to do with it.
I think they profess a Jewish tradition, maybe.
Yeah,
maybe what it is.
Right, right.
Whatever that is.
Right, and so it's pretty weak. So you think Abraham doesn't seem to be doing too good. So here is where where Abraham really does show you why the Jewish people have always been small in number. This Abraham thing, if you really want to be a child of Abraham, I mean, you can be a hereditary child of Abraham.
Right.
But if you really want to be the Abraham, like the son of the chosen guy, Abraham, then you're really going to have to put out. The big deal about Abraham is, do you communicate it to your kids? If you're marrying a Jew, and someone might say, well, I communicated to my kids even though I didn't marry a Jew. Personally, I'm not buying that.
Right.
There might be a couple people like that, but most people who are marrying non-Jews, they can't really expect to be communicating Abraham's legacy. Because,
no, it would be tough.
They'll say their spouse doesn't know anything about Abraham's legacy. I believe that most people say, well, I don't know anything about Abraham's legacy myself, so why should I? This non-Jew knows as much about Abraham as I do. Zero.
Which is how the intermarriage usually works.
Right.
That's why it works.
But the bottom line is that we've got, if it's communicating it and passing it on to the children, and Abraham's legacy carries on amongst those people who will pass on to their children that they are children of Abraham. And the children's children will be children of Abraham. And, keeping up with that is what makes someone a child of Abraham. So I was suggesting that perhaps the next time around, when they do this study, they shouldn't even include as Jews the people that intermarried. Whoa, I see people jumping literally out of their screens.
You just lost a chunk of Jews right
there. Boom, man, they just get coming through the cables. They're
I think it's happening right now.
The camera, they're like, the internet, the ether.
The Orthodox rabbi doesn't count us as Jews anymore.
The ether just caught on fire. Yeah. But for the purpose, at what point are we, let's say they did a study of Italians in America today. So who would be included in that study? So people who had ancestry that came from Italy.
3 generations, 2
right.
generations.
And what would be the purpose of doing a study of Italians in America today? Would you find out anything? Who are they? They're Americans.
I think it would be similar to doing a study back in the time when they say Christians. Christians were Jews, and they were just a sect of Judaism for a while, but they really weren't Jews anymore. And eventually, they weren't Jews.
Right.
They wouldn't done much of study to pull them and call them Jews. They weren't Jews.
So So the guy intermarried. He professes no religion. He doesn't marry Jewish. He has an ethnic, maybe relationship to Jews, but that's it. So why are we doing a study to find out if he's intermarrying or he's not intermarrying? what's the purpose of that?
At this point, it really doesn't make any difference. I mean, it really doesn't.
So the study of Jews in America is so fascinating. Like, would they do a study of Christians in America and include people whose grandparents were once Christians?
No.
I mean,
really
like,
not.
there's just no point, and the group is not a group anymore. Abraham's children, I guess if that's called the Jews in America, those are the children of Abraham, they have a definition. The Torah's definition is that they observe the way of God and try to emulate it, and they pass it on to their children. If you don't do those two things, what is the purpose of doing a study about the attitudes and ideas of that particular group?
Well, it's a good question, and then you get to, I have a lot of friends, people, a lot of them, again, up in the north who are Jews. I mean, they're Jews. I'm a Jew. Their kids, I told you they get bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, and I always ask why, because they tell me they don't believe in God. Why? Well, it's tradition. I'm a Jew. I'm a Jew. My parents were Jews. Now, are they Jews? Is there any reason to continue on with this tradition?
The reason I think that they hang on is because it's a very proud thing.
Right.
It's very proud. The Jews have a pretty proud history. I mean, we made it, we were here, and everyone down deep just hates to be the one that, after all this time, jumped off.
Right.
We got through all of this, and then, I dropped out at this point. No one wants to be that way. On the other hand, what are you willing to do about it?
Not much.
Right. And if you're not willing to do too much about it, so then it's like I have a friend, and he's 1/8 Choctaw Indian.
Right.
That's really nice. Now, what are you going to do with that? Right?
He's not coming to work with a headdress, though, or anything like that. No.
Right. That and $150 will get you a seat in the nosebleeds at the Pelicans game.
Right.
I mean, what?
You're not going to do any good.
So he's 1/8 Choctaw Indian. I mean, does that mean anything? Is it some legacy he passes on to his kids? It's like a factoid.
Yeah.
It's just a factoid. Once upon a time, or as we move on, it will be that people are going to go do like ancestry search, or go have their DNA, and someone will say, you're Jewish, or you're 1/8 Jewish, or you're 1/2 Jewish, and people go, neat. That's really cool.
Put that in the book. Okay.
Now what?
Well, I have a little bit of a different opinion, and this one will probably offend people even more than you just offended people.
That's hard. I mean, I'm trying.
I'll say the best I can. I'll say secular Jews. I won't mention any kind of denomination of them. But my theory is that secular Jews are Jews that, what I used to be a twice-a-year Jew, which I was. You go to the temple twice a year, and the rabbi, she tells you that, what you've been doing right or wrong twice a year. I believe that those are placeholder Jews. So just the opposite. I think those are the placeholder Jews. They're going to hold the place. They're going to teach the kid maybe a little bit of, you're Jewish, whatever Jewish is, placeholders, and along will come one generation in there where eventually there's going to be some guys who take it back to Jews.
Maybe. The Pew Research said...
I'm not doing well on that one.
Pew Research said that they have found that consistently 1/3 of the people, Jews, who were raised in whichever branch, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, move out. They move out wherever they were raised.
Okay.
And consistently, they move out, to left.
To the left, not to the right.
Right. There's a small little percentage that moves once. There was
placeholders.
I think they found maybe 6% of conservative Jews actually moved to Orthodox.
Okay.
But 1/3 of Orthodox Jews moved to conservative, 1/3 of conservative moved to Reform, 1/3 of Reform moved to left.
Well, don't they have a couple other steps? You have that, the Reconstructionist one, you have there's a couple of little steps.
So we're still waiting to see this placeholder thing.
Now, again, the world does change. Unfortunately, sometimes, as they say, there's no atheist in foxholes. Sometimes it takes some events that aren't the greatest thing in
Now,
the
some
world.
people, some groups will say that, well, at least we hung on to 2/3. And, at least we kept them in place.
Right.
So that maybe something could happen, and you're right, maybe when the Armageddon comes, maybe they can all of a sudden, here's the light, and something will happen with that. In the meantime, what we're seeing is that 1/3 moved.
Okay.
Right? And by the way, another interesting little thing that they found is that does not hold true anymore for Orthodox Jews under the age of 35.
Really?
The one-third figure is made up when you take all Jews who grew up Orthodox of all ages. So that means people who grew up Orthodox in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s,
Right.
including the 70s, the 80s, 90s, right? When you take all of them told, one-third of them are no longer Orthodox. They've moved over to something else, something less. However, they do not find that trend continuing. In other words, for the first time, a denomination seems to be holding its own with the dropout figure down around.
I already know why that is. Because the Jews are having a lot of kids here, and that's what's keeping us going here.
They're having a lot of kids, and they seem to be holding on to, high number, high percentage.
That's good.
Yeah. But they're not losing a third. I forget what number they are losing. They're losing a certain amount, I forget how much they're losing. But otherwise, the trends seem to be unabated for conservative reform of all ages, that this trend seems to be continuing and people are moving to the left and dropping out. So if the placeholders were trying to hold the place, something better happen quick because after a while you keep losing a third.
Not doing too well. Not doing too well.
So
bring this back to Abraham. And then the key to why it's over. So Abraham, is interesting where we are now from then. Abraham's best features are what made him our father, or made him the star of religion. It was not just his hospitality, not just his kindness, not just because he emulated God, which I assume was the important part, but the part that he was the first one, I guess, to realize that the most important thing about this is to teach this to your children, your generations, to keep Judaism going.
Right. You see, this is something, if it's just to be obedient, and because otherwise God's going to smash you, you don't really have to pass that on to your kids. They'll figure that out themselves. This idea of emulating God, this whole attitude of Abraham, that's something that is really him. It's really what you live for. And when you're living for something like that, if you really, really believe it, you should be able to pass it on to your kids. If you don't really, really believe it, then you won't pass it on to your kids. So really, to the extent to which it gets passed on, it shows how well he's doing. Now, from Abraham's perspective, you might say, well, it doesn't look like he's doing too good because he's losing a lot of his kids.
Doing pretty well.
Right. But, yeah, there's another school go all the way to the other end of the Torah. God says to Moses, he says, I don't love you because you're the biggest nation, because you're the smallest nation. In other words, I think it is understood that Abraham's children, there will always be some rate of attrition. They're always going to stay small. How do they always stay small? Well, maybe through persecution, or maybe just because only the heart is. Stick with it.
Maybe the chosen thing goes both ways. He chose us, but God choose back.
Right. Right. So that really it is too. And so that you have this small group, this small but hearty, dedicated group, and they're the ones that say, I'm a child of Abraham. The rest of them, again, I'm ethnically different.
One question about that, since now I feel good. I feel good to the guy I chose to emulate is the right guy here, because he's emulating God. So I feel good.
That's right.
But the one question about it is obviously we're talking about the great features of Abraham, and one of them being his hospitality, his kindness, everything like that, is emulating God. Is that a better feature than, say, Isaac, who was studying Torah? And I mean, when you look at the difference between the two, between Isaac and Abraham, it's pretty good. Where are we
I think you have to say that Isaac was also emulating God, but people are different. Everyone's different, and no one can be God, of course, and no one can even totally emulate God.
But Isaac had been picked?
I think Isaac would have been picked. That Isaac in his time was given a different makeup, and he was willing to sacrifice himself for God, to give it all. And that's a different thing. That's also an important trait, not to be overlooked. And in its time and place, essential. Right? Sometimes kindness, sometimes willingness to die is the more important. If you happen to be going to war, willingness to die is the more important trait than kindness. It all depends on where you are, when you are, but as long as you've got that underlying idea of emulating, that's the key to be. A-team.
I like that.
Okay.
All right. Great show. Great show. Well, we'll be back next week with another great episode here on Rabbi.